Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter here for Spaceflight Now. We're preparing for the launch of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, which you can see here at the heart of Launch Complex 39A here at KSC. We'll talk about the weather throughout the broadcast since it is a fairly big player in today's mission. Heading into today's flight opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 75% odds of favorable weather for liftoff. Taking a look at the wide view here, though, you can see there are some heavy clouds that are interspersed around the Cape this afternoon heading into the evening. 45th Weather Squadron listed the watch items for today's mission as notices for the thick cloud layers rule, the cumulus cloud rule, and excessive liftoff winds. Taking a look at the satellite images here, you can see the layers of clouds that are hanging around the Florida Peninsula moving towards the pad, coming from the west to the east. Although taking a look at wind direction, we're seeing sort of a combination of wind directions, some winds blowing from the east to the west here off the Atlantic coast, meeting those clouds. Here's another view of that, showing more of the clouds with greater specificity. We've also had some intermittent showers throughout the afternoon. You can see some of that precipitation on the radar here. So we will be monitoring the weather outlook. As you can see, the American flag beneath it, the flag for the next crew mission launching from Florida, that being Boeing's Starliner spacecraft on the crew flight test that is the mission patch for the flight that will carry NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams atop a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket and inside Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. We'll have much more on that mission leading up to it, set to lift off no earlier than May 6th. But for now, let's go ahead and focus on the launch du jour, which of course is a pair of satellites for a flagship constellation for the European Commission, that is Galileo. For our American audience, Galileo is akin to our GPS satellite constellation and similar to the global positioning network systems used by Russia as well as China, which each operate their own satellite positioning constellations. Got the launch team out today in force as we are, of course, monitoring the weather. Now T-minus 59 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. Our Adam Bernstein preparing to track the mission from here at the press site, as well as take some launch photography. Our editor for Spaceflight Now, Stephen Young, writing the technical operations of the broadcast. Our other photographer, Michael Kane, out and about, hoping to snap some pictures of this Falcon 9 in flight as well, though given the voluminous clouds in the area, may not be the most ideal day for launch photography if the mission is able to launch at all. But you can follow our launch team on their social handles. You can find Adam Bernstein at ABernNYC, Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr., and of course, if you are on X, you can find Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. And if you're not on X, formerly known as Twitter, you can also follow Spaceflight Now social presence on Facebook as well as Threads. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel right here on YouTube, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Hit the bell icon when you do and turn on all notifications. That way you get alerted to whenever we do start these live launch broadcasts and you don't miss any of the videos coming your way here on the channel. If you haven't already, after this broadcast wraps up, if you want to catch up on the news of the week, head on over to our latest episode of News from the Press Site, a weekly roundup of space news, conversation with the folks that cover them. We were joined this week by space reporters like Tarek Malik, who's the editor-in-chief over at space.com, and Passant Robiet, who is the space reporter over at Gizmodo. Great conversation, lasts about an hour, so if you've got some chores to do around the house for the rest of the weekend, go ahead and pop it on, listen to it in the background, and enjoy a robust conversation about a lot of great space topics. Taking a look at the live chat, also want to thank our moderators here helping us out this early evening from an East Coast perspective. Our thanks to Astro Jen and Astro Joe. Appreciate the both of you. We'll keep an eye out for our other mods. If they pop in here during the broadcast, we'll give them a shout as well. Stephanie B. and Rusty Shackelford. We're also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Mystic Art Images, Sofa King, Jamie Setchell, a.k.a. JJ, Gavin Martin, Annette P., Callistia Lee, Miles High, Florida Mama Bear, James Wilson, Butterfly, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and the ability to watch the liftoff of all of our Cape-based launches here in 4K. We're T-minus 56 minutes, 19 seconds and counting. SpaceX counting down to a T0 liftoff time at 8:34 p.m. Eastern. SpaceX will be trying to thread the weather needle here, of course. As you can see, the wind's still gusting as evidenced by the flags here at the press site. The Brevard County Emergency Operations Center, one of the most active EOCs in the country, has activated in support of this mission tonight, with a window designated by them as lasting between 8:29 and 10:40. Again, SpaceX targeting, again, 8:34 p.m. That is 0034 UTC for our friends joining from around the world. As we get things kicked off here, want to thank one of our channel members and moderators, Astro Joe, for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that generosity, Astro Joe, and for all you do as a moderator here. And to our newest channel member, be sure to thank Astro Joe in the live chat if you haven't already. Last but not least, you can support us using the YouTube Super Chat feature. If you have a comment or question or just want to offer some support this evening, and your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show, we'd love to join you in our live launch broadcast and do our level best to answer your question or share your thoughts on any aspect of the space program. And as you begin those robust conversations in the live chat, just remember, some folks may be new to watching launches for the first time. They may have some questions that you may think are obvious, but be kind to the community. We're all here to enjoy experience and get a little bit smarter about spaceflight. We also have support for this mission tonight from our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions, as well as Chuck Briggs. Assuming things clear up in a way that folks can actually see the launch tonight, we'll have some decent views for our neighbors to the north as this mission is heading at a northeasterly trajectory. We'll bring you that trajectory map in just a few minutes here. As we're T-minus 53 minutes, 2 seconds and counting. Let's go ahead and step through the countdown timeline of the mission tonight. Standard fare for a Falcon 9 rocket, but for those who may be joining us for the first time or just want a bit of a refresh, here's what we're expecting as SpaceX steps through the countdown. Of course, the first milestone will be the call to start propellant load. It'll be given by the launch director at the T-minus 38-minute mark. Assuming that go-ahead is given, they'll proceed with propellant load, which starts at T-minus 35 minutes. The loading of RP1, or rocket-grade kerosene, on both the Falcon 9 first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen will be loaded on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 16 minutes, liquid oxygen will start loading on the second stage. Before that, though, we'll see the so-called big vent from the strongback. It's a very striking visual indication that fueling is, in fact, moving along on time and on schedule. It comes about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. The T-minus 7-minute mark, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, and it protects the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strongback retract sequence begins. It starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, or the strongback, however you want to term it, will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the vehicle and stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About T-minus 3 minutes out, LOX load on the first stage is complete. 2 minutes before liftoff, fueling is complete on the vehicle with the wrap-up of second stage LOX load. And at that point, the Falcon 9 is loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. The SpaceX launch director will give their go for liftoff at T-minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And the all 9 engines ignite and are healthy, and the weather is satisfactory. The flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff, again targeting 8:34 p.m. Eastern, 0034 UTC. In other words, T-minus 50 minutes and 12 seconds. T-minus 48 minutes, 45 seconds and counting, roughly 10 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load, if they are, in fact, ready to do so. It's a little bit hard to distinguish on this camera, but we're starting to see just a little bit of light rain coming into the area here on the press site. Again, weather always a watch item with just about every mission, important to keep track of. Taking a look from another vantage point, we're at the press site here. Our friend Chuck Briggs is over in Titusville. For those local to Central Florida or know the area, right about US 1 and State Road 50. Fairly gloomy view from the Titusville area, so may not be the most picturesque opportunity for those watching the launch from, well, just about anywhere in Central Florida, including just a few miles away from right here at the press site. But we've got about the best views that you possibly can find. So if you're not able to see it with your own eyes from wherever you are in Central Florida or right up here on Florida's Space Coast, Brevard County, you stay right here with Spaceflight now, and we'll bring you the best views possible, assuming SpaceX is able to launch tonight in 47 minutes. Now T-minus 44 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. Let's talk about the trajectory and where this Falcon 9 is going to be flying today. Bit of a departure for Falcon vehicles that we've seen for quite a while. This one, a little hard to see in the live pictures here, but there are no grid fins and no landing legs on this booster, which means we have a Falcon 9 in its disposable configuration. So no booster recovery for tail number 1060, which is going to be making a record-tying 20th flight. But this one will never see Flight 21. It is, however, breaking a record that it happened to set as the most flight-proven booster to fly a customer payload. I mentioned it set the record that it is about to beat when it launches this mission. That was the 18th flight of this booster, supporting the launch of Intuitive Machines' Nova Sea lander back in February, Odysseus, otherwise known as Odie, which is in a permanent slumber on the moon's south pole. Flight number 20 for this booster, though, going to lift off from, well, actually where Odie lifted off from. Launch Complex 39A here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Falcon 9 is going to fly in a generally northeasterly trajectory. So again, if visibility clears up or is improved up along the coastline there's a decent chance you may be able to catch it if you're in the, say, Georgia or the Carolinas area. So if you have some friends or family that are in either central to northern Florida or up along the eastern coast, there's a chance that you may catch this Falcon as it flies heading in a northeasterly direction. Again, there is not going to be a drone ship out there ready to catch the booster because they're going to use the full power of the Falcon 9 here. But the payload fairings will be recovered on this flight. They splash down in the Atlantic Ocean under parachutes. Here's an image from a SpaceX presentation from earlier this year of what that process looks like. It's an important part of SpaceX's business model to make sure they're able to recover those fairings, save about $6 million per recovery. They've got two vessels that they use for such operations, Bob and Doug. Bob is up for this one. Doug is going to be used tomorrow for a Starlink launch, lifting off from Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is what that recovery process looks like. Beautiful sunset shot out in the Atlantic waters, snapped last year by the SpaceX recovery team. A little bit tricky to see just given the weather conditions, but taking a slightly closer look at the Falcon 9 rocket, above the inner stage and at the base of the Falcon 9 second stage, you can see a light gray band. And no, that is not the character and sootiness that is built up along the first stage. That's actually a protective band, a character of particularly long coasts and burns for the Falcon upper stage. Helps preserve the temperature of the cryogenic propellants on board. Again, the Falcon 9 uses a combination of RP1 or rocket-grade kerosene on both the first and second stages of the vehicle, and liquid oxygen as the oxidizer. We're now T-minus 38 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. Less than 30 seconds away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load if they are ready to do so. We're now T minus 36 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. Just a little over a minute away from SpaceX starting fueling operations if they are in fact prepared to do so. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, this will be the first time that SpaceX is launching a pair of Galileo satellites, and in fact the first time that any American-made vehicle has launched satellites for this flagship European constellation. Again, if you weren't with us at the top of the broadcast, the Galileo satellites are akin to the GPS satellites, which so many of us rely on throughout our daily lives, getting from place to place, and of course they are important for the government as well. Originally, the European Commission was hoping to launch this next set of satellites either with a Soyuz vehicle and eventually with the Ariane 6, the replacement for the recently retired Ariane 5 rocket. However, given a perfect storm of events, so to speak, if you'll forgive the weather pun, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022 and the end of the European Space Agency relying on the Soyuz launch vehicle, as well as falling behind on the development and introduction of the Ariane 6 rocket, that put the European Commission in a bit of a bind. So here's some comments from a news conference over in Spain from November of last year, where one of the commissioners is talking about making a hard choice, but deciding in order to keep as close to the timeline as they had hoped with the Galileo constellation, having to pivot to the SpaceX Falcon 9. Let's listen in.
As to Galileo, I've talked about as an institutional client, I'm not happy with what's happened, and you'll understand that there should be launches guaranteed. We had a calendar which was promised and which was not kept to, and because this calendar was not kept to, there was a very good rocket which we were waiting for and really needed. But there were delays again and again. And because of these delays, we had to make certain decisions because we're responsible in an operational sense for the Galileo constellations. Yes, we have 4 satellites to launch next year. And given that Ariane 6 is still not going to be available, apparently, I accepted a proposal from ESA to use SpaceX. We're still finalizing the discussions. But in order to do that, we need secure access. We're talking about very critical satellites, and so we're still negotiating with the American side. And once that's been finalized, yes, we will have 2 launches for 4 satellites, which will be carried out by SpaceX.
And again, that was Commissioner with the European Commission talking about the need to rely on SpaceX for their all-important Galileo satellite constellation. This will be the first of 2 contracted missions for SpaceX launching these Galileo satellites. There will be 2 apiece on each vehicle. We're now T-minus 31 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. No official word from SpaceX yet on the fueling progress, but we are starting to see some signs of vapor and a little bit of frost forming near the base of the Falcon 9 first stage. If you take a look near where the transporter erector starts to taper, you can see a little bit of frost forming again near the bottom of the first stage as that super cold densified liquid oxygen is loaded on board the Falcon 9 first stage tanks. Getting a view here from our friend Pete Carson's of the Falcon 9 rocket. We'll come back to him in just a second as he's making some adjustments. We're now T-minus 30 minutes and counting here on this Falcon countdown. At this point in the timeline, teams are loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels of the Falcon 9 first stage. That helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Taking a look now from Pete Carson's camera with Max Q Productions, you can see that frost forming again at the base of the Falcon 9 first stage. Appreciate that, Pete. Good visual indication that fueling is in fact in progress here. Again, because of how SpaceX operates and how the Falcon 9s work, they use essentially what's called a load and go, which means their fueling timeline is right in line with the countdown. So once fueling begins, they don't have the opportunity or the option to hold the countdown. So we're now T-minus 28 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. We'll continue to keep our eye on the weather, and that may be the limiting item tonight. But fueling is underway, so SpaceX is at least going to make a run at it. And as I was talking, we do now have word from SpaceX confirming what we are seeing and what I've just been saying, that fueling is in fact underway tonight. I mentioned that cryogenic helium being loaded onto the Falcon 9's first stage to pressurize the tanks. Same process will happen on the Falcon 9's second stage beginning at about T-minus 25 minutes. Now T-minus 26 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Taking a look back at the live chat, I want to thank the more than 11,000 of you who are watching with us live this evening. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button here, that thumbs up. Allow the YouTube algorithm to do its thing and bring this live coverage to more people as we continue on in the final 25 minutes and some change of this count. I also want to thank a few folks that are supporting us this evening using the YouTube Super Chat feature. But thanks to Mitchell Wilbur, one of our wonderful channel members, for a very generous $20 Super Chat. Thank you so much, Mitchell, for supporting us at that level, for your ongoing support as a channel member as well. Mitchell says, not the best night for seeing this launch. Really appreciate this channel and all involved for making it happen. Got the right guy to moderate as well. Well, that's very kind of you, Mitchell. Really appreciate those words of support. And we will do our level best to bring you the very best launch views that we very possibly can. Our thanks also to Matthew Lowry for also a very generous $20 Super Chat. Thank you so much, Matthew. And to Hunters Run Adventures, another one of our wonderful channel members, for a $10 Super Chat. Thank you, Hunters Run. Really appreciate your support tonight. And a thank you to West LA Response Videos for a $10 Super Chat as well. Thanks for the support, West LA. Always good to see some representation from my home state, California. T-minus 24 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. Here's an image of what the two satellites that are launching tonight look like. These are what Galileo satellites look like, stacked atop one another as they went through some testing. Both SpaceX and the European Commission, though, have been fairly quiet about this mission as we were leading up to it. Not a whole lot being said by ESA or the European Commission. And in fact, this launch, unlike launches of the past, is going to be fairly truncated. Similar to, if you recall, National Reconnaissance Office launches, where we don't actually see payload deployment and we don't see the payloads on board. We may not get a visual on this spacecraft here as well, though we'll be keeping an eye out for it. According to SpaceX's public launch page, its launch timeline notes that their broadcast will end shortly after fairing deployment, so we'll have to see if we are actually going to get onboard camera views of the Galileo satellites, but we may not see payload deployment. The last time Galileo satellites launched, it was on a Russian Soyuz medium launch vehicle. That launch timeline was about 3 hours and 47 minutes from liftoff to satellite deployment, heading into a medium Earth orbit, same as these satellites here are today. Here's another image of the Galileo satellites going through some vibration tests here, a shake table similar to actually the one that my colleague and Adam and I got to see up in Sandusky, Ohio, with the Dream Chaser on board. That vehicle looking to launch on a ULA Vulcan rocket later this year. There's one more image for you of a Galileo satellite with a little bit of added visualization from the European Space Agency, those blue lines there. Again, here's the launch timeline that we're looking at. The Falcon 9, again, set to lift off at 8:34 p.m. Eastern, assuming the weather is good enough for SpaceX to launch tonight. About a minute 14 seconds after liftoff, the vehicle will pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. T plus 2 minutes and 45 seconds. We'll begin a series of events in rapid succession. Will be first stage engine cutoff to kick it off at T plus 2 minutes 45 seconds, followed a few seconds later by stage separation. Then that upper stage engine, the Merlin vacuum engine, will ignite at T plus 2 minutes 55 seconds. And again, the last milestone that SpaceX has disclosed, payload fairing jettison at T plus 3 minutes and 39 seconds. Again, these satellites will be heading up into medium Earth orbit. And not much disclosed about that before now. Taking a look here at a couple of different views of the Falcon 9 rocket, the so-called big vent is underway. Good visual indication that fueling is on time. Again, this big vent is the process of them chilling the feed lines before they begin loading liquid oxygen on board the second stage of the Falcon 9. Process should wrap up at about T minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, so we've got a little less than 2 minutes to go on this event. As of 2021, the last time Galileo satellites launched, there were about 2.3 billion users of this type of global positioning system, or their version of the GPS. According to ESA Director General Josef Arspacher, the full constellation of these satellites will be 38 in total. To date, there have been 28 launched. 20 are still in service. 8 are in some state of non-use. We're T minus 16 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. About 20 seconds left here on the big vent. Less than 40 seconds until second stage LOX load begins. There you see the big vent wrapping up. We're now T-minus 15 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. Coming up on 30 seconds into the process of liquid oxygen load on the Falcon 9's second stage. This is the last bit of fueling that is just now getting underway. Again, taking a look at the second stage of the Falcon 9, you see that gray band at the base of the Falcon 9 second stage. This is important protection for the RP-1 or the rocket-grade kerosene to prevent it from freezing. Again, this gray band is used when there are particularly long coast phases of the Falcon 9 upper stage. This mission heading to a medium Earth orbit. We're now T-minus 13 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. I want to thank the more than 23,000, creeping upon 24,000 of you watching with us live, and to those who may be tangentially watching. Really appreciate you being with us tonight. Hope you're all having a wonderful evening. If you're just now joining us, I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter here for Spaceflight Now, and you're watching our live launch coverage in progress of the 12th orbital launch of Galileo satellites, Europe's answer to America's GPS constellation. Similar to global positioning networks used around the world and from countries as well as the US, like China and Russia. Taking a look at the live chat, want to briefly thank a few folks for your support this evening. Thanks to Jay Leon for a $2 Australian super chat. Thank you so much. Brittany Evanson for $2 or $4 as well. Thank you. Catherine Driscoll for a $10 super chat. Really appreciate your support. Thanks to channel member Rocket Profit for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity. And to our newest channel members, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. As a reminder, channel membership allows you to watch the liftoff of this mission in stunning 4K. Discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, and access to member-only videos here on YouTube. In response to Robert H. with a $10 super chat asking, is the Falcon 9's trajectory up the United States East Coast going north? Yes, it is a northeasterly trajectory, so if you are in Central Florida on up through about the Carolinas, if visibility is good enough, you may be able to catch a view of the Falcon 9 tonight, flying in an expendable version. Set to lift off in just about 11.5 minutes. And with this particular Falcon 9 first stage booster goes with it the history that it has amassed. So let's take a moment, step back in time, and talk about the flight history of one of SpaceX's soon to be tied as a launch leader on its final flight. This is booster tail number 1060 in the SpaceX fleet, first launching back on June 30th, 2020. Ironically enough, with another global positioning satellite, the GPS-3 space vehicle number 3. As part of the US GPS constellation. these satellites built by Lockheed Martin. They're also named after famous explorers. This satellite series is. This particular satellite, which lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 with the booster landing on the drone ship Just Read the Instructions. That GPS satellite was nicknamed Matthew Henson, named for the famous black explorer who was a part of the Perry expeditions. This next Falcon 9 booster launched on September 3rd of 2020 on its first Starlink flight, lifting off from the same pad it's sitting at right now, Launch Complex 39A, landing on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You, which is now stationed over in California. Next up was another batch of Starlink satellites on October 24th, 2020, landing on Just Read the Instructions, lifting off from pad 40. Next up, a communications satellite for Turksat, the Turksat 5A, launching on January 8th of 2021. That was followed by another batch of Starlink satellites, L18 on February 4th, L22 on March 24th, L24 on April 29th. Its first rideshare mission came up with the Transporter 2 launch on June 30th of 2021, and this was the first time this booster landed back on land over at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Launch number 9, another batch of Starlink satellites, 4-3 on December 2nd of 2021. Moving on to January 19th. Typo there. It should be 2023. There's a Starlink 4-6 mission. Sorry, not a typo. That was just me misreading. Apologies. Starlink 4-9 coming up on March 3rd of 2022. That was followed up by Starlink 4-14 on April 21st. Starlink 4-19 on June 17th. Then part of the Galaxy constellation refresh, the Galaxy 33 and 34 satellites, lifting off on October 8th, 2022. Another rideshare mission followed that, Transporter 6, on January 3rd of last year, lifting off from Pad 40, landing back at Landing Zone 1. Followed up by some more Starlink satellites here in a row, Starlink 5-15 on July 16th, Starlink 6-18 on September 24th. And then the last time it launched a customer payload, that was Intuitive Machines' Nova C lander named Odysseus, aka Odie. First American lander to return to the moon since Apollo 17 in the 70s. And most recently, Starlink 6-42 on March 24th of this year. And that brings us to today, the launch of these two Galileo satellites. And we are now at T-minus 7 minutes and counting. SpaceX is now performing a chill down of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. Let's go ahead and talk about the Falcon 9 rocket before we get too much further in this mission. The Falcon 9 is SpaceX's flagship rocket. It stands at 70 meters, or 229 feet tall. We do have word from SpaceX that RP-1 load on the Falcon 9 first stage is complete. Falcon 9 also has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Most of it comprised of the first stage booster. Today's booster, as we just described, has launched 19 times, going for a record-tying 20th time on this flight. Designated 1060. At the base of the first stage are the 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. And what you'll see in the image on the right, but not in the live pictures to its left, are those landing legs, since again, this first stage booster will be expended on this mission. Above the first stage is the inner stage. It's a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. Again, a bit of difference from our normal Falcon flights. Most Falcon 9 rockets have those hypersonic grid fins, which are titanium winglets providing stability and steering, as a Falcon 9 would normally come back through the atmosphere to land on a drone ship or at a landing zone. But again, with this being an expendable Falcon 9, there are no grid fins on this booster. And they are pressurizing for strong back retraction here at the pad. The clamp arms will open up and retract, and the transporter erector will recline about 1.5 degrees from the vehicle. At the top of the inner stage here are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. The first stage main engine cutoff. High pressure helium is used to release those lashes, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure clean separation. Do have word strong back retract is in motion. Second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, it's powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle optimized for burns in the vacuum of space and will be put to quite a bit of use on today's mission, again as indicated by that gray band. The upper stage produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust. Burns the same propellant mix, kerosene and liquid oxygen, same as the first stage. Following completion of this mission, SpaceX will likely perform a deorbit burn to drive it back into the atmosphere. The upper stage will burn up, helping to eliminate the risk of creating space debris on this flight. You can see a little bit of motion there on the strong back as it is pulling back in the strong back retract sequence. Payload fairings at the top of the rocket contain the 2 Galileo satellites. They're made up of a carbon composite material standing 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, these fairing halves will be recovered a little further down range from where we showed you on the map. They'll be scooped up by the recovery vessel Doug and brought back to Port Canaveral, where they will be refurbished and turned around for future missions. We do have word that Stage 1 LOXOD is complete, and the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with just about done fueling. Fueling will wrap at about the 2-minute mark. Taking a look from some pad views here at SpaceX, we'll just note for a little bit of housekeeping. The countdown clock at the upper right-hand corner of the screen is in real time. The bottom of the screen coming in from SpaceX on a slight delay, so you'll see some events happening in real time on our feed and then from SpaceX in a slight delay, so just want to make sure you're aware of that discrepancy. We have word Stage 2 LOXOD is complete, and you're seeing the ground gas closeouts here from our camera views. We're now less than a minute away from the launch of the Galileo satellites. We're fairly certain our countdown clock is now in tune with a countdown, although there's some slight uncertainty, but we're fairly close here, about 30 seconds away. And we do have confirmation that we are go for launch. Coming up on about 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket carrying 2 Galileo satellites to medium Earth orbit. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower, and for the first time, Galileo satellites for the European Commission are flying under the power of an American-built rocket. Let's listen to the roar of those 9 Merlin engines. We're now coming up on a minute into flight. All moving nominally with this mission so far. About to approach max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. And some great tracking views from our team here. This view from Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions. Falcon 9 now supersonic, which means it is traveling faster than the speed of sound. As the vehicle is passing through max Q, we're now just about a minute away from a few different events coming up in rapid succession. MECO, or main engine cutoff, coming up at T plus 2 minutes and 45 seconds, followed by stage separation 3 seconds later, and then second stage engine start, or SES1, at T plus 2 minutes and 55 seconds. Now 2 minutes into flight. They're now thermally conditioning the Merlin vacuum engine, preparing it for its ignition. Some views from our tracking camera here at the press site from our Adam Bernstein. And this from Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions. Less than 20 seconds now until MECO. And MECO. Stage separation. And SES1 second stage engine ignition. You've seen those events now. A slight delay from the SpaceX feed. See that first stage booster falling away from the upper stage. And at the request of the European Commission, we are not getting upper stage views of the payload. You're looking here at the control room in Hawthorne, California. You'll hear a call out for fairing separation in about 30 seconds or so. Go ahead and try to listen in for that in just a second.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And with that call out from Mission Control, we have confirmation verbally, unfortunately not visually, of fairing separation. And because of the request of the European Commission, this will be the last bit bit that we see here from SpaceX as they wrap up this part of the mission, although given the timeline from past Galileo launches heading up to medium Earth orbit, and as we saw with the gray protective band on the Falcon 9 second stage, it'll be quite a long time before we get confirmation of deployment of the satellites for the Galileo constellation. Taking a look here, SpaceX actually providing a graphical representation of their launches and landings over the course of the years here. And as the cadence picks up, you can get a good indication of just how much things have increased over time. Again, taking a look now, we're in 2021, now 2022 on this timeline. You can see just beneath the launches icon the number of landings both for Dragon spacecraft as well as first stage boosters and the payload fairings. And as we saw, a representation of the legacy of the Falcon 9, SpaceX has noted that they are working towards qualifying their Falcon boosters and fairings to support 40 missions each, as SpaceX currently has now 2 boosters that have launched 20 times, and B-1062 was recovered, so it'll likely be the first to fly for a 21st time. You can see here leading up to today's mission, this is the legacy of that first stage booster, which went out now in its 20th and final mission, beginning nearly as it began with the launch of the Galileo satellite, a nice sort of poetic echo of the GPS-3 Space Vehicle 3, Matthew Henson. And again, unfortunately, because SpaceX is wrapping up their feed from their onboard camera views, we're going to go ahead and begin to wind down our coverage as well. Before we do want to pivot to our live chat, thanks to more folks for their support tonight. First off, thanks to all of you who have been watching live. Really appreciate you being with us on a Saturday night. Hope you come back and join us once again for live launch coverage of the SpaceX Starlink mission, Starlink 6-54, lifting off tomorrow evening, just a little before 6 o'clock Eastern. And to those here in the live chat who have been supporting us, do want to give you your flowers. So thanks to channel members Nelson Reyes for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that support, Nelson. Thank you for your generosity. Thanks to Callistia Lee for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Thank you so much, Callistia. Good to see you as well this evening. And to Mitchell Wilbur for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. So to our newest 20 channel members here, thank you so much. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Mitchell, Callistia, and Nelson in the live chat if you haven't already. Thanks to TCow4054 for a $2 super chat, hanging with Matt and Karen, saying go Falcon 9. And yes, indeed and did. SpaceX, once again, managing to thread the weather needle here tonight. Our thanks to Chantel Kriegsman for a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Chantel. Our thanks as well to Natalie Florida EST for a $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Natalie. Appreciate your support. And to Stephen Bybee for a $2 super chat as well. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate you. And with that, let's go ahead and wind things down as we always do here at Spaceflight Now with a look at the mission stats as they currently stand with a successful liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. This was the 20th and final flight of Falcon 9 booster 1060 in the SpaceX fleet. This was the 327th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 42nd Falcon 9 launch of 2024. This was SpaceX's 270th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This is SpaceX's 43rd overall launch of 2024, including the third integrated flight test of their Starship rocket from down at their Starbase facilities in southern Texas. This was SpaceX's 111th orbital launch in the last 365 days. This was the 82nd orbital launch from Pad 39A. And before I proceed, I do want to mark a historic milestone with that, being that this was the 82nd Falcon flight from Pad 39A. SpaceX has now tied the total number of space shuttle launches from this historic launch pad. Both the shuttle and the Falcon vehicles now stand at 82 apiece. 9 of those were Falcon Heavy flights. And we'll have to see, this may be one of the final Falcon 9 launches that we'll see before SpaceX begins to convert this pad to a Falcon Heavy configuration in support of NASA and NOAA's GOES-U launch coming up on June 25th. We'll keep an eye on the calendar for that. And you can be sure to keep up with the launch schedule over at spaceflightnow.com. Just click on Launch Schedule. This was also the 175th overall orbital launch from 39A, including, of course, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, Space Shuttle, and the Saturn V. Because this booster was not recovered, we are going to go ahead and skip over the recovery stats slide. We now see SpaceX standing at 42 launches, just dwarfing every year except for 2022 and 2023, and is now less than 20 from catching the total number of launches that lifted off in 2022. Moving out to some industry stats from around the world. This was the 31st orbital launch from Florida this year, the 45th orbital launch from U.S. soil. This is the 49th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company, including the 4 so far from Rocket Lab down in New Zealand. And around the world, this was the 80th orbital launch globally, with a couple of orbital launch failures, as noted by the asterisks here. So the U.S. with 49, China with 18, Russia with 6, Japan with 3, Iran and India with 2 apiece. You can see the U.S. represents 61% of the orbital launch pie so far in 2024. We're T plus 12 minutes, 8 seconds into this mission. Again, the last time we saw Galileo launch on a Soyuz medium launch vehicle back in 2021, that mission duration was a little bit shy of 4 hours. So don't wait up if you're wanting to catch some news of the deployment of the Galileo satellites. It's not going to happen more than likely for quite some time. We'll keep an eye on that transporter erector as it's going to be brought back up into its upright position, part of SpaceX's process of turning around these pads as quickly as possible, preparing for future flights. Again, we've got the next flight already on the calendar. That is the Starlink 6-54 mission coming up, set for tomorrow, Sunday, April 28th, with a liftoff targeting 5:50 p.m. Eastern, 21:50 UTC, with backup opportunities lasting until 9:50 p.m. Eastern, so a 4-hour launch window if SpaceX needs that amount of time. And that will be the 13th flight of that particular first stage booster, but we'll have plenty more to say on that as we get into our live coverage tomorrow. So if you haven't already, now's a great time to subscribe to the channel here. And again, remember to click the bell icon and turn on notifications so that way you're alerted when our live launch coverage begins and we post new videos here on YouTube. I'll leave you with one last milestone from SpaceX. Tonight was the 200th mission to use flight-proven payload fairings. Another bit of history on this already historic flight. SpaceX launching flagship satellites for the European Commission. And that will go ahead and do it for our live launch coverage today. Want to thank everyone who has been watching with us live, and special shout out to the Spacebar viewers over in Titusville. Go ahead and give my family a quick shout out on the back end of our live launch coverage. Hope you all have been having a good time. I'll see you when we wrap things up. Our thanks, of course, to our wonderful moderators here in the live chat, Astro Joe, Astro Jen. I see Stephanie B made her way in. And to Rusty Shackelford as well. Appreciate all you guys do to help keep things kosher in the live chat. Our thanks to our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions, and for Chuck Briggs for helping to provide tracking views of today's mission. Our thanks, as always, to our launch photography team, Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane. Again, if you are on X, you can find them at their handles, ABurnNYC, MD Kane Jr. Be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. If you're not on X, you can find us on Threads as well as Facebook. And if you'd like, you can also give me a follow. I'm on X and Facebook as well. Just search for Will Robinson Smith. Our thanks, as always, to our editor, Stephen Young, for providing technical support for this broadcast. Most importantly, thanks to you for wherever you're watching with us around the world. We appreciate our international audience, and it is always a wonderful thing to be with you on a live launch broadcast day. And with that, again, we'll see you very soon for the launch of the Starlink 6-54 mission. But until then, we have one last super chat hitting the buzzer from Sniper 1188 with a $2 super chat. Appreciate that support. And with that, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, everybody. Good night.